All right, welcome to the June 12th SIG Auth biweekly meeting. We have a sort of short agenda, so let's jump right into the designs of note. Let's see, who wants to talk about the external key signer cap?
It looks like Micah isn't on the call. This one has been out for a while. I think that it's pretty close to being merged and potentially worked on as another feature in 1.16. If anybody has anything else to say, it looks like there were no strong objections and discussion dried up a little bit. So hop on if you have any less objections, but I'll probably try to LGTM this sometime before next SIG Auth meeting so that we can start working on the 1.16 alpha.
Can you send that to the mailing list as well, just for people who weren't on the meeting?
Sure, will do.
I saw a mention in the cap of having multiple key files. Is that a new feature, or is that something that is already supported? Like we can advertise multiple keys?
That's already
yeah.
So you have a single signer and multiple verifiers. So that lets you do key rotation.
Poorly. Still requires component restart, so which is one of the motivations for this one. Yeah. Did you have any other questions about that, or why that is useful?
No, I was just curious.
All right, let's move on to the certificates API cap, unless there are any other questions about external key signer.
Cool. I'll do this one as well. So this is a retroactive cap for the certificates API. I documented hopefully the current state only and tried to pull in some information about how this API is being used today. And the motivation for doing this now is that we would like to see some of our old features go to GA, and I hope to use this cap as a starting point for deciding beta to GA graduation, and also as a place to propose API changes or any changes along that way, along that path. So currently, I just assigned it to the two sub-project owners. But if anybody else is interested or has questions or thinks that stuff should be explained more or stuff should be included, please take a look and read through it. And hopefully once this is merged, this will be a place where we can start to propose the path to GA.
And I think the time frame for that, since this is really just hoisting current state into cap format, this will likely go in once we're convinced that it is accurately reflecting the current implementation. And then over the next probably 2 or 3 weeks, like to work on pinning down what we intend to do for V1. So when the discussions docs or PRs around that get opened, we'll send that out to the list as well, so people can keep up to date with that and weigh in with any questions.
Yeah, that's when it'll get interesting.
Yeah, and there are a few open issues tracking that, so we'll reference those as well and make sure that the things that were listed in those and in comments on those issues are brought in for consideration when we're trying to figure out what will be V1.
Yeah, probably the most interesting section for people who are already up to date on the certificates API is the known issues section. So I think that's probably going to be important to flesh out before we embark on deciding how to get this thing to GA.
Looks good. Thanks for writing this up.
Sure.
All right, let's move on to our discussions. Jack, are you on the call?
Yep, I'm on the call.
All right, take it away.
So I wanted to ask about what are the long-term plans for certificate rotation. I know that we have a solution for kubelets, but it seems like people are using that solution maybe in a couple of different ways. So I'm using it right now by giving it an initial certificate, which has just the normal kubelet permissions, and then it will just rotate it from then on. And then for all other components, I'm having to restart them every single time I reissue a new certificate from Vault. And I'm kind of interested to know, long term, do we want to do the kubelet style approach with more components, or should we go down a completely other path? So I looked into the kubelet style approach and how hard it would be to take that code and make it generic, and then put it into some more components. And I have a branch doing that, and I tested it out on the controller, and it works fine. But right now, you would still have to manually approve the CSRs. I'm wondering, so for context, the approach that the kubelet kind of takes is that the controller can be configured to sign, automatically sign kubelet certificates if they have the exact right kind of group for that node. And I'm wondering, long term, could the controller be allowed to just always allow renewals? You can allow a specific group to, okay, sounds like there's already an issue for this. Thanks, Mike. But,
yes, that's not a great issue, but
yeah,
I think that kubelet is a little bit different than other components because the kubelet really needs some sort of external credential, and there needs to be an external trust set up between the machine and the API in order to validate that certificate signing request. For things that are running on the cluster, we can chain up from that trust and use the service account tokens as the input to authorizing the CSR. For things running kind of outside the cluster, like maybe a static pod that runs a controller manager, it's a little bit more difficult.
So that's the components that I'm kind of interested in, are maybe static pods. Yeah, I agree with you on the service account front. I'm not 100% sure, what do you mean when you say that you need some kind of external trust? Do you mean because you have to issue it like an initial certificate?
Yes, exactly. So how do you approve the initial certificate signing?
So I mean, I can only really speak from my experience. So we are doing everything out of Vault where possible, but obviously we still have a signing CA to sign the CSRs. And then we just issue that initial certificate one-off from Vault. And then after that, it gets reissued, obviously, from the signing CA, which is not in Vault. Although long-term, it would be really cool if we could sign those out of Vault as well. So for us, getting that initial cert onto the node is really simple, and we do that for all of the components, but obviously the complexity is about rotating them. So I'm kind of wondering what's the long-term plan.
To make this work, you actually have two different aspects, right? You have to both be able to get a new certificate, and you actually have to have the process be able to load and use the new certificate, presumably without restarting itself. Is that what you're trying to avoid?
Yeah, exactly. And the kubelet has all of that logic already, basically.
Yeah. So are you going at that in two different steps, or are you trying to do it at the same time?
So in terms of the approach with the kubelet, it kind of does it, well,
No. I mean, like, so if you made a poll to make a Kube controller manager dynamically
Oh, I see.
load, I'm
Yes.
sure that would be met.
Yeah, so
Acceptance.
the approach that I was taking in my PR is it pretty much exactly mirrors the way that the kubelet works with the -- rotate certificates flag, which is basically it uses whatever kube config it boots with, which has whatever privileges it has. And then once it starts using that, but then asynchronously immediately tries to rotate it out. I think this is how kubeadmin works as well. And then once it's rotated it out, it then keeps it fresh. So it never like blocks on that first initial issuance. You have to give it all permissions to start with.
If we kind of break the problem apart, like David was saying, and like today, client Go can consume token credentials or certificate credentials. And if you give it a token file, it will actually read in the token from that file, but then set up a background thread to watch that file for changes. And if the token that's in that file changes, it'll start getting used by the clients you create. Yeah. Doing the same thing, if you point a kubeconfig file at a certificate credential, would be a really easy to reason about change that would let you drop in any certificate rotation method or integration. And I think that would be a great first step.
That's probably my dream solution, to be honest with you. I guess I'd kind of assumed that had been deliberately decided not to do it that way.
Nope.
Okay, yeah, because like, so for example, if I compare it to etcd, which reloads the certs on every request, or if I compare it to Vault, it reloads its own TLS certs on a SIG hub. Like, that's so easy to work with. Yeah. And then Kubernetes is the only one where I have to like Docker restart containers, and it's the only tricky one. So probably my dream would be, yeah, like a periodic reload, like a file watch falling back to periodic reload would be probably ideal. Or doing it on a signal is probably okay as well.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to implement that. I guess that's such a simple solution, but I guess I just assumed that wasn't the plan.
No, I mean, we've prototyped stuff out before, but never pushed it through.
Okay, if there's somewhere I should look for like a past implementation, that'd be
yeah. I'll point you to one that kind of works. It's not beautiful, but it'll at least get you looking in the right spot.
I can polish that up and see where it goes. Okay, so if that's what we think is the best like solution for now, that sounds good. I mean, I think the kubelet thing is like highly complicated, and frankly, because I've already had to build my own certificate distribution mechanism, it's kind of not necessary for me to use it. So yeah, the ideal thing for me would be just allowing it to reload from disk.
That sounds easy.
Awesome.
There are a bunch of things to dislike about the kubelet certificate manager. And it's kind of sad that it's, I don't know. It's sad that it has made its way into client Go. It makes it harder to change.
Yeah, I mean, trying to make it generic was actually a complete nightmare, and it does some kind of slightly strange stuff that I just found very difficult to write in a generic way that wouldn't just be for kubelets.
Yeah, and honestly, if we got the reload from disk working the way we envision, I would probably be in favor of at least isolating the rotation logic inside the kubelet so that the rotation happens in its own little side loop. And when it has a new cert it's happy with, it drops it onto disk. And then the normal refresh from disk takes over.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wonder if we still need, like, so the kubelet does some stuff where it has like a custom dialer.
Yeah, you still need that in order to.
Still need that, right?
You still need that, and you need the custom get certificate implementation so that when a new certificate gets picked up, you can drop open connections and force them to reestablish so that they don't get hung with a established connection with an expired cert. So
I was wondering about that. Is that because of like TLS renegotiation? So like, does that mean that an expired cert, even if you have an open TLS connection, if the cert expires while it's open, is that a problem?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I wasn't sure about. Okay, cool. And the kubelet also does something where it takes this function out And I think when it drops heartbeats, it calls a function telling the dialer to kill all connections. Maybe I'm just missing context, but like, what's the purpose of that?
That was specific to node heartbeating. That was so a black hole node wouldn't try to keep sending heartbeats on a dead TCP connection for so long that the node fell out of ready state. That's not related to certificate rotation.
Okay. Oh, okay. So that was just a useful trick that dialer exported that function.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, that's why I was confused. Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to get working on that and polish something up. And this is really exciting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry, I was muted. Ahmed and Mike, do you want to talk about key IDs for access tokens?
Yeah. Do you want to do this to here, or should I?
I can kind of go over it a little bit. So basically, what this is when we issue a service account token, it's this PR is going in and adding a key ID to the token that tells us which key the token was signed with. And that's to help the OpenID relying party look up which key it can use to verify the token without having to try all of them.
This is also useful in the case where a key is rotated because it signals to a relying party that the keys need to be refreshed if there are any key IDs that you don't know about.
Yeah. So Mo asked to just have a discussion about it in the SIG Auth meeting to see what people thought. Yeah. One question I have maybe for Mike is, when we load multiple keys to advertise them, do we serve key IDs on them currently and the well-known Zoox URL?
No, we do not, but there is a proposal to do so.
Okay.
So yeah, these would have to correlate with those. I think that we would also like I know we would want an external signer that proposes a key ID to have that key ID make it into a signed token. I think in general that having defaults for the file RSA, like PEM encoded RSA private keys would be useful. I don't see a huge downside in picking a default derivation for the key ID. I think that's the main question that I had for people in here. And
I have one comment on this too. It's a different issue, but the open feature the KEP PR that I have actually adds the key ID. Well, over an external signer, it lets the signer determine the key ID.
Right.
But on the in-tree, it doesn't. It just sets an empty key ID. So I guess is this proposal to have like a derived key, like basically a SHA sum of the key, always be the key ID?
No.
Okay.
It's for the RSA and ECDSA keys that are read from
disk.
Yeah, from disk.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so we would want to forward the key ID from opaque signers into tokens and allow the external signer to decide what they want the key ID to be.
Right. Okay.
It seems like there are no strong objections to the default derivation. Then I'll ask another question. Does anybody see a downside to exposing key IDs in the JOT headers where we haven't in the past?
The KID field is a standard JOT field, right?
Yeah.
Are there any discussions of considerations or issues for exposing that in the spec where it's mentioned? I'm not aware of any.
So I've looked in the spec, and there's actually, it doesn't actually mandate. The only places that it talks about it is in one example. It kind of gives the example Mike gave, where if you see an unknown key ID, that's your trigger to go back and refresh the keys from the issuing party or the identity provider. And then the only other place it talks about key IDs is when you advertise multiple keys. When the identity provider advertises multiple keys, it must put a key ID in there. So the spec kind of doesn't say one way or another, although it seems like they're operating in a framework where key IDs are just assumed to be there.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to allow rotation, and we do, then we're going to want to advertise more than one key, which means we'll be advertising the key IDs anyway in our key set. Nothing jumps out at me as a problem with it. But.
Cool. Well, we'll have to sync back up with Mo, who's, I don't believe is on the call, and see if he has any other concerns. But it sounds reasonable to pick a derivation for the in-memory RSA and ECDSA keys coming out of this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we want to make sure we're doing something sane, like deriving from the public keys.
We are.
You can never check being sane too many times. The only other thing I can think of is like some kind of DOS about falsely advertising new key IDs, like with every request and forcing the cache to flush. But you could easily debounce that or say we're not going to refetch keys more than once a minute or whatever.
Yeah.
I spent some time going over that with CJ last week, and it seems like no matter what if you have logic to flush the cache, which you will need, you can always, whether it's triggered on key IDs or a key you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
It just makes that signal explicit. The signal would implicit if the verification fails. It just makes that signal explicit. So, and relying parties need to be responsible and not destroy the world with robots.
You make it sound like a bad thing.
Cool. Well, we'll follow up on the GitHub PR.
Would we need to, do we need to document this derivation in some existing cap? There was somebody mentioned.
The cap to do it is probably not a cap yet. It would probably be the token accounts or this service account token one where we started to flesh out some of the Jukes URL stuff. That would probably be a good thing to turn into a cap. Although there's like 3 different features at this point related to that cap. Do caps support having 3 different features that have different levels of maturity at a given time?
We've done roll-up type things around some of the CRD and admission webhook stuff where there were different pieces at different levels. Once the primary feature goes to GA, it's probably worth starting a new one for additional things that kind of make its way through the life cycle. But if the whole thing is still beta level and we're just kind of fleshing out different pieces of it, expanding in the current design kind of helps keep it coherent. That doesn't seem bad.
Okay.
If it's going to be a big thing that has a lot of different considerations and we're going to want to be able to like merge and iterate, then probably split it out, just because once you merge into something that's already implementable, it gets impossible to follow. So if it's a small thing that we can probably get agreement on in the life of one PR, then just do it in the same doc. Otherwise, split it out.
Sounds good.
All right. Anything else on key IDs? Okay, any other announcements or discussion topics before we move on to issue triage?
Just a small question for service account, the traditional service account tokens, they don't expire ever, right? So is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so with the bound service account tokens, they expire. Is the rotation for those tokens supported in the Kube client?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's it.
It was supposed to be supported for a really long time, but there was a bug in it, so now it's really supported.
Cool. Thanks. I'll check it out. Yeah.
And I apologize for showing up late, but did you have any action for me on the external key signer cap?
We were going to send it out to the mailing list, and if there were no objections, get it in and start working on it for 116 in alpha.
Great.
All right. I think at next week's biweekly meeting, we should probably start talking about or run through our plans for 116. There are a lot of things that were originally slated for 115 that got punted to 116. So I think it would be a good idea to just kind of get those all documented and see what we need to do for each of those. All right, we've got about half an hour left. Hopefully we don't need all of that time to go through the issue triage, but let's see what we have. All right, 7 unassigned, unprioritized issues. Just open all of these.
Yeah, this one's annoying. This is, I would say this is important. It's definitely probably a blocker for the GA of exec auth plugin.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the experience for interactive login pretty miserable.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say important long term, but I don't know who's actively I would say short term if somebody was actively working on the GA of exec plugin, but I'm not sure if anybody is.
Yeah, do we have who's the sub-project owner for exec auth plugins?
It rolls up under client auth plugins. Let me take a look.
Probably you, me, and David.
Yeah. Andrew Louie has been doing a little bit of work in it as well. So maybe we can volunteer him as a group to help out with this one.
Yeah, so part of this is it's unclear when you get an error from an auth plugin, like, is this a retriable error or not? So it might be as simple as, this is an error you should not call me again for, or you should not call me again for X. We have similar things for success, right? Like when it returns a successful response, it can indicate how long we should hold on to that successful response and not re-invoke. So
we also have login for some of the other ones that we could call proactively in interactive clients. I'm not sure if that maps, but that does not map to exec plugin yet.
Yeah, not yet. If you want to boil that into like a higher level flow at some point, that's fine. But I think first we probably just need parity on non-successful responses to say, I failed and you should not call me again for X amount of time or for the lifetime of this process.
Yeah.
So.
You can assign the bug to me. I can take a look.
Was that Andrew? Andrew, sorry.
Yeah. I think we can do something with exit codes or maybe modifying the API because it's not V1 yet.
Yeah, and the API is still beta, and if we make additive changes, so if a client, an exec plugin returns a failure and a field that says "don't recall me," the previous version of Client Go isn't going to understand that, and it'll call it again, but it's not going to be worse than it is today. All right.
Sounds good.
Awaiting evidence is my vote.
Yeah, I'm not super excited about forwarding client certificate contents. This seems more like a auth terminating proxy, which we already have support for. We have request header auth.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
What evidence are we waiting for to see if this is something we should do?
I wanted to have Whole Garo provide evidence that we should do this, or I don't know. The alternative is that we say that we are not going to do this and close it, which we never do because we're just too nice to close any issue.
Is the evidence we want that our current mechanisms could not support this by like writing your own little proxy?
Well, I think we know they could.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave a comment asking there are significant issues with the auth proxy approach and saying we're not intending to do this otherwise, and put a time on it or something.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right. Label for pod security policy limit.
Support. Appears that Jordan is waiting on more information.
All right, I think we should just ignore issues tagged as support where it needs information.
You can assign me so I don't forget. I think they came back with the information I asked for and I hadn't circled back to it.
Okay.
If someone else has time to look at it this week, that's great. If not, I'll get to it when I can.
It looks like they have not provided that information.
Did I? Oh, right. That's right.
All right. This is also tagged as needing more information.
That also doesn't seem like SIG Auth. That seems like cluster lifecycle.
Or CLI. If they want image verification of the kube control that they apply to their cluster over HTTPS endpoints, they want to have a checksum. Maybe
Yeah,
CLI.
That's not auth. It's either cluster lifecycle around like add-on packaging stuff or CLI. So I would add those two. Maybe tag Justin Santa Barbara. He's been looking at add-on packaging definition stuff. And remove us.
Yep.
this was a documentation fix. Did that ever? Somebody assigned it to themselves yesterday, and they have a doc out, PR out.
Oh.
Did we need to make documentation changes to the API types, or was this just a Kubernetes IO website doc change? It looks like must run as root could potentially, must run as non-root could potentially be clarified in the API docs.
Yeah, I can take a look at this.
Yeah.
We need a dummy account in the community so that we can flag things that have been assigned to a non-Kubernetes community member.
Is that even possible?
Not assigned to them, but something that a non-community member is working on.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you mean.
Like if we created just a placeholder GitHub account to indicate that.
I finally have a use for my smartest Clayton GitHub account that I've been hanging on to.
Yeah, if somebody else is working on it, just assign it to Smartest Clayton. I guess we adopted the token cleaner from SIG cluster lifecycle and Bootstrap token. Is this actually tracked as one of our subprojects? I guess it's, I don't know.
It Bootstrap auth is an authenticator, and this is an associated controller. I don't think we reference the owner's files, but.
What
Right.
tokens is it referring to? Is it referring to the bound service tokens or something else?
No, they're called Bootstrap tokens.
Okay.
As far as I know, they're only used by Kubeatom.
Okay.
Yeah. There's special secrets in the Kube system namespace that you can use to authenticate things while you're bringing up a cluster.
Cool. Thanks.
Looks like there's a PR out that just needs to be reviewed.
Yeah, I would call this backlog, and we assign it to someone to review the PR.
I'll review it.
Is that the PR you were talking about?
Add resync to avoid. Yep.
All right.
Did this get reopened?
Yeah.
So this is allowing opting out of a service account token per container.
I thought that.
If it's only opting out and not trying to mount distinct service accounts into different containers, I would say I'm neutral on that. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I don't feel that strongly either way. I could see that being useful-ish.
So the current behavior, it auto mounts on all containers, right?
It's all or none. So
Okay.
you can opt out for a pod, but you're opting out at the pod level. And
can you assign this to me?
Yeah. This seems like something that's probably niche enough that you could just opt out at the pod level and then specify the volume
I would like for that to be the case. However, the volumes are dynamic.
Yeah, until you get until we get the bound service account tokens broadly available,
Yeah.
predefine them in your containers. But that's a good point. If that's where the future of that feature is going, then we probably don't want to add a new API field.
Yeah.
So that would be good to add as a comment. I would call this backlog in that case.
I'll comment on this offline. All right, looks good. Let's quickly take a look at unprioritized issues. All right, I'm gonna ignore the support ones. Is that a SIG Auth issue?
Credential providers showed up in the list of big packages.
Uh-huh.
I would call this backlog. For all the SIGs involved. You're welcome. Yeah.
Is this SIG Auth?
It's
Authorization.
half us, half API machinery. So yeah.
Fair.
I would call this important long term. Yeah, this is one of the, similar to the garbage collector authorization admission plugin. This is something that people who are running, who are giving access to somewhat adversarial actors would probably care about. Yeah.
Is this something that could be addressed with a generic policy mechanism like Gatekeeper?
Sure, yeah. Though, because we are depending on finalizers for things like garbage collection and namespace resource cleanup and proper operation of persistent volumes, like we're depending on this for what we would consider safe functioning of the system. Being able to circumvent that, even accidentally, unless you like run some out of tree policy mechanism, doesn't seem great.
Yeah, I see. Also, it sounds like you might want to bind it to the requester and not the object being acted on.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Which
So,
is harder with those policy mechanisms.
how do you think we should constrain this? Are you thinking of making this as a sub-resource so that you can RBAC on it, or something else?
Possibly. At the very least, doing some authorization check, which in the past we've sort of hacked up into fake sub-resource checks. Like, do you have access to the finalizer's sub-resource, even though the finalizer's sub-resource doesn't exist? But we run an authorization check against it. Yeah, possibly something along those lines.
Cool, thanks.
Right.
Yeah, this is still hard for people to set up an API extension or a webhook that is with server auth.
Given that we're wanting the extensions especially to go to GA in 1.16, getting good documentation around this is probably important. If only so we don't have to answer the questions in Slack 10,000 times.
All right, yeah, I agree that if this is targeted for GA in 116, it should be important soon. Is David still the right assignee for this?
Can he say no?
Say no, you have to nominate an alternate.
Mo is not here.
Sounds good.
If you let me create a cert signer for arbitrary common names and we skip hostname validation, then you can assign it to me. Otherwise, you have to document it.
He has a 3-letter GitHub handle, and I'm very jealous.
There it is.
That bears no resemblance to his name.
Yeah, I have a hard time remembering this. All right.
I would say this is awaiting more evidence. I don't.
It's also not ours, is it?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
But also, it looked like they were hashing like secrets in the original design. We don't do this yet, right?
Oh no, there's an option in the kube control command to generate a name based on contents. I thought the original feature was questionable.
Hopefully, maybe the UID, which is not known at creation time.
Not UID, because it is, I think the intent was around like rollout when you change a secret or config map, like you would generate a new name so that the same content would be have an immutable or idempotent name, and then if you change the content, the name would change, and you'd update the deployment to point to the new name, so that rolling back would point you back to the old data. I think in the 2.5 years since this was done, other approaches, like some of the stuff Kustomize is doing, where it manages generating the secret or config map and rewriting the deployment, has happened instead. Anyway, but it's not us.
Not ours.
Okay.
Is this still?
Yeah, is this fixed?
I thought Jake was resolving a lot of these.
Yeah, it's probably also a SIG GCP thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, tag Jake and see if this is already resolved. Deka.
What is it?
DEKK, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say this is priority important soon.
Yeah.
If it is not already resolved.
All right.
SIG GCP. I don't know.
It's not just GCP. I would guess most of the test instances. Jump to the bottom. I think there was some activity on this recently.
Is this talking about removing the insecure port on masters?
This is saying not removing it yet, but in our CI runs, turning it off. Yeah. Oh, so the bottom looks like part of this is, yeah, GCE API servers no longer use it. So I'm guessing this one is resolved. That's good. Yeah, let's call this important soon as well, and see if Jake can chase down which instances are still not switched over.
added one issue. If you this is assigned to me, and I was thinking of starting work. If you guys are done, then take a look at this and see if this is still important. I need some guidance on that. Whenever you guys are done, just.
Sorry, are you talking about the authentication to the streaming server or a new issue that you had?
Yeah, the
Oh,
one-
issue I posted on chat. Sorry, I derailed it a little bit. Yeah.
All right, let me finish running through these, and then we'll go to that.
Sounds good. Yeah.
I will follow up on this. I kind of want to remove this streaming server and just proxy all connections through the kubelet, so we can rely on the kubelet client authentication.
Which means we change the availability of exec or we remove the ability to ever get higher availability on exec except restarts of kubelet.
Sorry, you want to have higher availability on exec than on the kubelet?
Yeah. I mean, the original goal for all of this was to get the kubelet out of the loop and replace it with something that's purpose-built to carry gigs of traffic if you try to run a backup through exec. So Mike and I had a discussion at KubeCon in December, and I understand the point of view of trying to get to the most secure option possible. I just don't think the kubelet is the right funnel from an availability perspective to run gigs of data through.
If you're trying to run gigs of data through, aren't you going to run into problems at the API server as well?
Which is another part of the problem, which was something Mike and I were kind of discussing. I mean, whatever we do here is going to be more involved than just something at the kubelet. And so I guess I view the current situation as ugly and hacky. The right solution probably is to move logs, exec, port forward out of kubelet and API server into something that can be orthogonally scaled. That's a much bigger chunk of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we would start with this issue. We would want to know the end-to-end, how do the bytes get from one device to the other, and then maybe one of those steps would be adding authentication to the streaming server, but it might look completely different. So,
are you talking about the work Walter's doing on the 116 alpha of the network proxy thing?
That's the master half. That's distinct.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Not even. No, what we're talking about is exec and logs streaming not going through the API server and not going through the kubelet.
It's
somehow.
Remove the reason.
Gotcha. So even remove that part, right? Yeah.
Or
Okay.
redirect or tell you where to go or whatever. Yeah.
I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Somebody would have to sign up for a very large chunk of work, which is what the scary part is.
I'm all for not what we have today. I'm not exactly sure what I'm for. But yeah, we wouldn't start working on this piece until the big picture was clear. So
yeah, agreed. I would love to have this conversation in another forum. I'm not convinced that we need to build something like that into core.
Yeah, I think most of it would be migrating what we do now out of core into something that could maybe run on the cluster or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Probably going to take exec from a lot of admins, cold dead fingers. I mean, we've never tried to remove something that I know people use every day of their lives.
We're not going to remove it. We're just going to move it.
Well, out of core. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We can go back to it.
Yeah.
On a related note, we're working on adding throttling to a lot of these flows, which also affects this case.
We wanted to get to the issue that was posted in chat. Let's get through these last couple.
Yeah, maybe let's just skip ahead to that. Let me see if I can find my chat window.
It's 66311.
All right. Oh yeah, this one. Was there, what was the action item here?
Oh, I wanted to know what work does this need to be. I'm not very familiar, but I wanted to see if I can take this up, and not sure how important it is. So if you can point me to somewhere I can read about what this is, or just give me some pointers, I can take a look.
How about if you and Mike sync up?
Yeah, let's sync up on Slack.
Okay, sounds good.
Just one comment on this. So in order to use this to isolate nodes from each other, this form needs to be used that includes the node name. The problem there is that any component talking to nodes would then need to manage a separate token for every node, which gets problematic for something like the metrics server, which is potentially scraping thousands of nodes in a cluster. And I think in those cases, using client SIG Auth is probably a better approach. So I guess from that perspective, I wonder how useful this ends up being.
If we had a way to generate client SIG Auth with expiration times from cert review, but then we have to worry about scoping and rotation. But that might solve other problems.
That's basically the issue that was linked earlier in the agenda.
Yeah.
I agree that probably certs are a better solution for talking to kubelet handlers.
I still think that this is a useful feature as long as we have the token webhook for the kubelet though.
Yeah, it at least allows an operator to prevent people from sending super powerful tokens all over the place.
So a question I would ask on this, Tim, too, is like, so we're basically defining an API of strings within the audience. What other namespacing would we need to preserve in the future for other audiences? And would we want to fill out some examples here so we could discuss it? Like, only the audience is, I mean, audience is a little weird in a lot of respects, but things along the lines of per namespace scopes or per API server or control plane or a specific worker, how would a service account be able to say that the audience is to a service account, et cetera?
For nodes, I would like it to be the self-link of the node in the API. But
which group?
Which group? Yeah. Which version?
Yeah, which version, which group? It would be good. Like and David and Jordan can speak to something. Like we certainly had wanted scoped tokens for a while. I think the use cases for this are a little bit different, but certainly I just want to see like a little bit more like what are the other things that we would ever shove in here, and do we have enough like potential use cases that we could make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I don't know. Let's follow up on Slack, and maybe we should remove help wanted from that and discuss a little bit more on the issue before we.
Looks like it was already removed.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right. We'll have to follow up on these last two offline or next time. All right. Thanks, everyone.